And thank you, Apple. It is a pleasure being on this stage tonight. Tonight, I'm going to tell you how I created a stop-motion animation video in less than 19 days. You're going to meet a quirky professor, and you might, just might, shed a tear. A little bit more background about me. I arrived in New York nearly 20 years ago. This is back in the age of film, so these are Polaroids from shoots that I've had. Now, I'm an early adopter. I love digital. And in 1999, I went down to Cuba for Sony to actually shoot some stock images for them for their very first digital camera. This thing shot onto 3.5-inch floppy disks. Jesus. Now I shoot on to disks that are about the size of your thumbnail. So the types of clients that I shoot for are musicians. For instance, Blow Up Hollywood, who's in the house tonight. Woo! Currently working on a portrait series for their new CD release. Victoria Herman, a rock and roll singer. Harvey Jones, who you're actually going to hear 2 of his pieces tonight in the presentation. I photograph for businesses such as Oyster. It's a swimsuit company based out of Brooklyn. Bike by Me, a Swedish company where you can actually customize the color of your bikes. Between the Chicks, a women's dresswear company that actually also created their e-commerce website. Victoria's Secret, also shoot interiors for interior designers and interior magazines as well. Conceptual photography from advertising, editorial, and my own stock portfolio. I use Aperture on a daily basis. It's a great program to manage all of your digital assets. On my desk in my studio, I have 8 1 terabyte external hard drives. These drives store and manage my digital library. The other day I got a call from a client and they were in a panic. They had lost their images and I hadn't heard from them in years. In 30 seconds, I went to my Aperture library, found it, and the images were over 10 years old. I have over 125,000 images in my Aperture library. Not only is this a great digital asset manager, it has a simple yet powerful tool, the slideshow feature, and that's what I use to create stop-motion animation music video. So what is stop-motion animation? Stop-motion animation is a technique using still imagery to physically manipulate an object to appear that it is moving. I'm going to show you an example now that I actually created for a client of mine called 145 Antiques. Jerry and Jim have this big loft space out in Long Island City. They got 2 Jack Russells that run around. They got a cat named Minoche, which means kitty in French. And I created this piece with them to show off their inventory of French vintage furniture. It's a fun video. See if you can spot where Minoche, the cat, makes a cameo appearance. This piece is titled Magic. Harvey Jones created the custom music for that piece. Shortly after this project, Nadia contacted me and asked if I would create a stop-motion animation music video for a single she was to release in December called What is Christmas? It was already mid-October when she contacted me. And when we were initially on the phone talking, I was going nuts with the number of frames it was going to take to create this stop-motion animation. I have live via satellite a professor now who's going to show you how many frames it takes to create a smooth stop-motion animation video. So he's with us now. Hey, Professor, we're ready. Show us how to do it. Show us.
Oh, thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. So a smooth stop animation video takes 24 frames per second. Let me just show you a little bit of math. 24 frames per second times 60 seconds, that's a minute, you see, equals 1,440 frames per minute. Well, most music tracks are 3.5 minutes long. Nadia track is 7 minutes and 16 seconds long. That's just Nadia. So, if we take 7 minutes and 16 seconds times 1,440, that equals 10,310 frames. That's a whole lot of frames.
Thanks, Professor. We'll come back to you in a moment.
Thank you. We'll see you real soon.
Nadia was to hand draw all the frames for this stop-motion animation music video. Remember, we had spoken in mid-October. It is now November. There is no way she's going to be able to draw 10,000 plus frames. So what I did is I devised a plan to simplify the process. Here's what we did. Nadia would draw an empty environment scene. Then she would draw a gang of figure movements to go in that particular scene. So how did I get them to move? Aperture talks directly with Photoshop. And this is how it works. So in Aperture, I select my scene, and I take that scene into the external editor, which is Photoshop. Once it's in Photoshop, I create a new layer, and I place that first figure in the scene. Now when I resave this file in Photoshop, it automatically updates the file in Aperture. This is now the master file of that particular scene. Now I know it's the master file because Aperture creates these great badges down in the bottom right corner. That circle with the dot means that this file has been edited outside of Aperture. But wait, we have yet to create our first frame, and that's still easily done within Aperture. Aperture, you just click on the new version button, and that creates a new version of your master file. We got frame 1 now. How do I create the second frame? We go back into Photoshop, I untoggle the first layer, I create a second layer, put in the second figure, I resave it, and automatically in Aperture, it updates the master file. I click on the new version button again, and that creates the second frame. Now all you do is you do that same process over and over until you finish the scene. Once you got your scene done, you want to make sure it's in order, and you can simply drag and drop the frames where they're needed. Next, you want to make sure the frames are actually sequentially numbered, and Aperture will do a batch renaming for you. Super easy. So now that all of our scenes are done, they're organized and renamed, it took over 30 scenes to create this video. The next step is to create the slideshow. The bulk of your work is done by this point. So here's how it's done to create the slideshow. You go into the first scene and you select all the frames. And you drag them right into the slideshow. Now once you take all of your scenes and you get them into the slideshow feature, the next step is to bring in the music track. And Aperture talks directly with iTunes. Simply find the track and drag it right into the slideshow bar. Next, I select all the frames and I globally set their time to a short time. For this video, a half a second. I toggle off the transitions so there's quick cuts between each frame. Then I can go into individual frames, select it, and adjust their time so that it will go with the beat or the transition of the music. I can even go in and select randomly single frames and adjust their time as well. So the professor told us how many frames it would take to create a smooth stop motion animation video. We had a deadline to meet, so I asked him to come up with a new mathematical solution so we'd make this deadline. Here he is, back now live via satellite. So, Professor, tell us how we made the deadline.
Oh, yes, it's good to be back. So, I'm going to tell you how Spencer made his deadline. It's a very specific mathematical equation, devised it himself. You take the 12, 17, 11 deadline, and I ran it through a numerologist algorithm, which is take the 1 plus the 2, the 2 plus the 1, the 1 plus the 7. Stay with me. 7 plus the 1, and the 1 plus the 1. That equals 13. I'm not done yet. Take the 1 plus the 3, and that equals 4. Now remember in the previous video how I talked about how many frames it would take to create a smooth stop animation video? Well, pay attention. We're going to take that 4 and we're going to multiply it times the square root of 10,310 frames. Well, we need to make that deadline of 12, 17, 11. So you ready for the answer? Hang on a second. This magical chalk is amazing. Alright. And the answer is, wait for it. Hey, you, right out front, pay attention. You're going to miss something.
Sorry about that. You can be a bit rude.
Higgly-piggly. And that's how Spencer made his deadline.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here.